Okay, let's talk about CSS grids. And what grids are is another layout tool to allow you to control where items are placed on the page. And you might find it a little bit easier than float or absolute and relative position or positive and negative margins and some of the other things you've been doing in order to position elements accurately on the page. Here's what I have to start this lesson off. I have some basic HTML. Okay, so I have 7 divs, each of them numbered inside the div 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Each of them with a class. They all share the same class. They all are considered grid items. In addition to that, each has a unique class, which is grid item 1, 2, 3, 4, so on and so forth. So I can target individual grid items if I want to, individual divs. All of those, so this whole group, lives inside of another div that I've given a class of grid to. And up above, I've got a style sheet embedded in the head of this document that just has 2 styles so far. One for the class of grid and one for the class of grid items. Grid has a background color of aquamarine. We can't see it right now because the divs are over the top of it and blocking it out. And the grid items have background colors of gray with black borders, which is why we can see them. So how do we start with this grid layout tool and what can it do for us? Well, the first thing you need to do is apply the display property and set the value equal to grid, because that's what tells CSS you're about to start working with grids. Now, if I save this and refresh, nothing happens. By itself, it doesn't do anything. Notice I hit the refresh button up here. I'm using VS Code. And I have clicked on the Run and Debug button on the left-hand side of VS Code already, which is giving me this HTML browser. And I can control that browser with the refresh button right here, so I don't have to go over there to see what's going on. So now, let's look at the next most important feature. You have to define rows and columns that make up a grid. So the way you're going to do that is with grid template. And you have grid template columns. And I'm just going to leave that there for now. And you have grid template rows. And I'm going to leave that there for now. We're going to start filling these in. Now what you have to do is you have to fill in a measurement. How wide or how tall do you want each one of your rows to be? And that doesn't mean plug in one number, like 25 pixels. If I do that, I better put a number in here, otherwise it's probably going to be broken and not work. Let's put 50 pixels. If I do that, save it and refresh it, we end up with 1 column. But there's already a hint about what might be going on here. Look at how tall number 1 is compared to 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. It's bigger. It's bigger because we specified 50 pixels, and we didn't specify a height for the others. So the others have collapsed to whatever size the text is within them. And so that probably clues you into the fact that if we were to add a couple more numbers, like 50 pixels, 30 pixels, 100 pixels, saved it and refreshed it, we're now controlling the height of these individual rows. This one's 50, this one's 50, this one's only 30, this one was 100. These others are unspecified. We can do the same with columns. If we give it more column measurements, we'll end up with more columns in our grid and not just the 1 column with everything stacked on the left-hand side. So likewise, I can give it different numbers, 30 px, 50 px, 100 px. Let's save that and let's refresh. And immediately we have 4 columns and 4 rows, but it only looks like 2 rows. Don't concern yourself with that. You have 2 rows with visible content. The other 2 rows are still here, they're just invisible. If we added enough divs to fill these up, you would see them. To demonstrate that, I'll just copy these divs, paste them in a few times, save it, and refresh. And now you can see we do have multiple rows and columns already there waiting for us. And if we go beyond our row count, then we start to lose any height. Notice these were all controlled. We had specific heights for these, and then these are back to collapsing on themselves and only being as high as the text that we put in them. So those rows and columns are there even if you're not using them, and that'll become important later. Let's undo that copy paste. So we're back to the 7. Save that and refresh again. All right, now some of your layouts may require you to do exactly this. It can be very handy to control your individual column and row sizes, but it's not always necessary. Frequently, your column and row sizes will end up being very similar, or at least some of them will be very similar. And so you can do something like this. You know what? I want a little bit more room here. Can I get that? Yeah. Okay, I can get that out of there. I'm going to wipe out that. I'm going to put in the word repeat, and then some parentheses, and then you just tell it how many columns or how many rows you want. So if I say I want 3 columns, then I could put in a comma and put in a measurement. 3 columns, 30 pixels, and save and refresh. And that's it. 3 columns, 30 pixels. We didn't have to write 33 times. I can do the same with the rows. In fact, what I'll do is copy this and paste it in right there. Save that and refresh. And now we have 3 rows, also 30 pixels tall. And at any point in time, we can change our mind, redesign this thing entirely and say, nope, now I want 5 columns, and refresh. And now we have 5 columns, just like that. No floating, no margins, no positioning, nothing done to any of these divs down below. It's just modifying the overall basic grid layout. So already you've got a tool that might be kind of handy. Now, grids have some of the same properties and features as HTML tables, which means you can control the spacing between the spaces inside of a grid. Those spaces are called cells, so grid cells. So just like TD cells in a table, we can control the space between them. So let's go do that right now. You wouldn't do that with row span and col span anymore. Sorry, not those at all. Cell spacing and cell padding anymore. You would do them with column gap to control the space between your columns. Let's do these one at a time. Let's say column gap is going to be 5 pixels. Already had a semicolon. Let's refresh and take a look. Now we have 5 pixels of space between every column. Notice the rows are still touching, so let's go ahead and add a row gap. And let's set that to 5 pixels as well. Save it and refresh. And there we go. Now you can more clearly see where the individual cells inside this grid start and stop. And notice there's no height or width given to any of these divs either. That's all being controlled at this point by just the size of the grid. And so we can leave it like this, and then if we resize, we can only go so far, and those things stay exactly like they are. Sometimes that might be what you want. Other times you might want these things to resize as your window gets bigger or smaller. That might help you overcome some of your design challenges. So you could do percentages. We've all done percentages before, but to do that, you've got to make a calculation. Let's say we want this to be 20% because we've got 5 rows, and save that and refresh. And now we've got 20%, and if we change this window, they change accordingly. But if we suddenly decide, you know what, we don't want 5 rows or 5 columns anymore, we want 3 columns, save it and refresh. Well, now 20% is still going to change, but we're not using up the entirety of the window because we didn't account for the fact that we only had 3 now, and so each one should be 33%. There's an easier way, and that easier way is with a new measurement unit. I'm going to say 1 FR. FR stands for fractional unit. And if I save that, each one of our columns is going to use up an equal amount, 1 FR, of whatever free space is available. So if you think about that, we have 3 now. They're each going to be basically 33%. They're going to be a third of that available window space. I don't have to change this number if I decide to change my columns. So if I go back to 5 and save it and refresh, now they're just a fifth of that available window space. So the computer's doing all the math for you. You don't even have to think about it anymore. Boom, it just happens. We could even say we wanted suddenly 15 for whatever reason, and again, it's figuring it out. It knows how much space each of these should take up. And they're dynamic. They change as you grow, shrink and grow. I think I'm actually going to settle on 4. And I'm going to do the same thing with the size of the rows. I'm going to make that 1 FR as well. And repeat or refresh and see what we got. And there we have it. So that's the available space. And that is because, notice these aren't very tall. They're as big as the numbers. Grid, which is our container, this is our grid right here, which is wrapping around all of these, doesn't have a height. So this 1 FR is based on a grid that's collapsing on itself. So many times we run into divs that collapse on themselves without heights and without proper content. We're running into that again. So I'm just going to hit height, and I'm going to give it a number, let's say 500 pixels, and refresh. And now you can see that those grew accordingly, and there's room for 3. Notice I said 3 rows, and we got 1, 2, and enough space here for a third if we had a third. So that's working. But what if we wanted this green aquamarine box to also change size? Well, we're not really getting that by specifying the height in pixels. That's just not working for us. We could specify it in percentages, but percentages when dealing with an entire window height don't always work very well either. There's another measurement unit you might enjoy, and that would be 100 VH, which is viewport height. So if I save that, so we're doing 100% of the viewport. Now if I refresh, this div is 100% of the viewport, and it will change now based on how big your viewport is. So now these divs are all resizing happily. Now you are seeing a little white margin up at the top and lack of a white margin down here until I scroll down a bit. That's because the body has a built-in margin and I didn't wipe that out. In fact, I could wipe that out. Let's go do that. Body, curly brace, margin. Whoa, max resolution. That's not what I wanted you to autocomplete to. Margin 0. Save that and refresh. And there we go. We've wiped out the margin. So no more scroll bar. It just automatically fits. It's perfectly at 100%. All right, let's try some other fun stuff with this grid. Notice where all of these numbers are. They are in the top left corner of those divs, which is where you would expect them to be without any sort of styling or positioning. That's just where content ends up, top left corner of a div until you do something. There is an easy way to get it centered, which is something we commonly do and usually have to do with some positioning and some margins and some padding and all of that. But you can easily say, let's see here, in this grid item, that we would like to place our items in the center. However, wait, this is not going to work. I'm going to save it, I'm going to refresh it. No change. Why not? Place items is something that only works inside an element that has been set to display as a grid. We only have display grid here, not here. If we want to use place items, we also need to include display grid here. Ooh, grid rows. Whoa, that's autocomplete's not playing nice with me right now. Display grid. Save. Now refresh. And all of the numbers popped dead center. And so that's going to be a handy feature. So now let's play with something else. This is all well and good. This gives you a lot of power, but not a lot of flexibility. We can have that flexibility by styling these individual divs now, which is why they have individual class names. So I could come up here and I could create a class for that item. And now we can control where that item appears on the page, not just what the content of the item is and have it entirely dependent on the grid system below it. So we can easily tell it that we want it to start in a different location somewhere else on the page, just by telling it what grid column to start on and what grid column to stop on. And the same for the row, what row to start on and what row to stop on. So we would do that with grid column. And there is a grid column start and a grid column end. This just combines both start and end in the same place. And so right now what we're doing is we're starting on 1, and then there's a slash, and we're ending on 2. The border is what it's counting. So border 1 is way over here on the left edge, border 2 is right here, border 3 is right here, border 4 is right here. So by doing grid column 1, 2, we're not moving it at all. But if you think about where the other columns are, even if you can't see them, there are still columns down here. We could have it be, let's say, we want it to start on 3. We want it to start on 3, and we want it to end not on 4, but end way over here on 5. So suddenly, you are about to see a div that is capable of spanning 2 normal cell locations within the grid. So it's kind of like col span and row span in the old HTML tables. So it's still living in row 1, but once you push things over that far, there's no room for these others, so they shove down. But what if we wanted to move it down and not just have it shove over? We can also move it down. All we need for that is grid row, and it needs the same thing. Where is it going to start and where is it going to end? Well, it was starting on 1, and let's start it on 3 now. So first border, second border, third border. So we'll start it on 3, and let's end it on 4 for now. Well, yeah, let's end it on 4 for now. And so now it's down here. So 1 border, 2 borders, 3 borders, 4 borders. How many rows do we have? We only have 3 rows. If we increase that, let's say we wanted 5 rows, save that, refresh. We've just given ourselves some more room. We can end this down, like we can use 6 borders for that. Refresh, and now we're stretched all the way down. Let's move this up so that it starts up here instead of down there. Save it and refresh. And remember, it still retains all the other properties of the grid layout. So it's still resizing quite nicely based on, whoa, that was bigger than I wanted it to be. Okay, snap to the side, please. There we go. It's still resizing based on the 1FR that we used for the basic grid size, because none of these items still yet have a size. So we could very quickly, and without any real work at all, turn this into a sidebar that runs along the whole right-hand side of the edge of the page, just by starting it at the very first border and running it to the bottom. So instead of 2, say a 1. And with that one change, we now have a right sidebar, and everything else is adjusting around it accordingly. So even though this was box 1, it's now on the far right side of the page, and it doesn't matter where it started. Likewise, we can randomly take one out of the middle here. I can move that 4 just by styling grid item 4. What was the last thing I copied and pasted? Okay, good. Let me just put a period in front of that and throw in some curly braces. And we can do the same sort of thing. I'm just going to copy this, because basically that's not going to change. And we're going to change some new numbers. So we just get to arbitrarily say, where do we want 4? I'm going to want 4 to stay in this column, so it's not going to move anywhere to the right. So as far as columns go, we're just going to say 1, and I'm actually going to get rid of, no, I'm not. I was thinking about it. This part here is optional. If you're only going to stay 1 column wide, you don't need an ending border. So, but I am going to have it end at 3. So remember, left border 1, 2, 3. So I want it to end right there. And I'm going to move it down. I actually want it to be in this spot down here. So we're going to go 1, 2, 3, 4 for the row. So it's going to start on row 4. And yeah, it can end on, actually, let's end it on row 5. Not 56. Save, refresh. And there's our 4 moved down. And it didn't just leave an empty hole. The other things flowed into it. And so this gives you a lot of control, a lot of very easy numerical control up here in your CSS of where your actual HTML shows up on the page. And notice I'm not doing a lot of fighting with magic numbers up here. Not floating, not positioning, nothing like that. So I think this is a very valuable tool, very powerful tool that is going to help you to design complex web pages even easier. There is more that you could learn about grids, but that is enough to get you started. Those are the basics.